Tavshim Memtes, it was the night of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and the Rebbe then said at the end of the Sikha, the Rebbe said, "A guten Chodesh and a guten Yom Tov." Which means the Rebbe was referring to Rosh Chodesh Kislev, a inyan of a Yom Tov, inyan that Chassidim took upon themselves and went from year to year, and b'meila this was niskabel by the Rebbe as the Sarusa de Lesato Mitzat Chassidim, and as the Rebbe referred to it as the inyan of a Yom Tov, as he mentioned it in Tavshim Memtes. As mentioned earlier, there's different levels of Nisim. One Nes, which is the highest Nes, is a Nes that happens to the Nisi Hador, a Nes that happened to the Rebbe himself. So the Rebbe says this is not like a Nes that happens to an individual person or to his Rebbe or to his father, but it is something that it like happened to him alone, because the iskashrus, the connection that there is between the Nasi, the Nisi Ador, with the generation, is not just a iskashrus of two separate things, but it's one guf echad mamish, and that the whole generation are all individual organs, evarim pratim, from which are receiving their chayas mehanasi. We'll discuss a little overview what took place in the months before Shmini Atzeres, and also what took place in the months after. And when one looks over the Sichas, studies them, analyzes them, doesn't need much to chapsach, realize how the Rebbe was in the months before Shmini Atzeres dropping lines, sometimes more than a line in Sichas, as we see already in Parsha Ekev, which was Chabad of. There was a Fabrengen then, although it was a Yarchekala, but the Rebbe Fabrengt, it's a small Eilam. For those that remember, it was also dripping from the roof, and the Rebbe's bima was moved up all the way till the end, and it was a very, very small Eilam. And the Rebbe spoke about the Yarchekala. It was a very special, interesting kiruvdik expression, how the Rebbe expressed himself by that Fabrengen. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Rebbe even gave from his Mezenas, figuring that they didn't expect a Fabrengen. So the Rebbe, after he made Mezenas, he also shared with his Mezenas. By that Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke a Sikha about Chabad Lubavitch. That Chabad Lubavitch is the day that the Yisurim of Yecheskel HaNovi ended. Yecheskel HaNovi was instructed by the Eibishter to lie on a certain vata, Shchavlecho, Atzitcha Asmolis, Atzitcha Yemonis. This was going through Yisurim for the generation. The Rebbe connected it with his father. It was 2 days after Chofav. But the more we think about it, how the Rebbe elaborates on it, and we look at the date, we see it's exactly 2 months before Shmini Atzeres. The Rebbe writes that this is the inyan of the Tzaddikei Ador going through the Yisurim of the generation. Chayelo, as we all know, the Rebbe then sang the Nigun Tzomel Lecha Nafshi, and the Rebbe changed from words Liris Uscha Chveidecha, the Rebbe changed to Liris Nafshi Ukveidi. Remember then, we were discussing it. What does it mean? It seemed to be very personal, but nobody was able to point what's going on over here. What is the Rebbe referring to? Erev Rosh Hashanah arrives. The Rebbe is taking Panim, and then comes the Pan Kloli. By the Pan Kloli, when the Rebbe received the Pan, the Rebbe responded, beginning as the usual nusach, that the Eibishter should fulfill Memale Mishalis Kol Levav Kol Echad Ve'achas L'Teva Ve'Levracha. And then the Rebbe continues with a line that we don't see it in the other years. The Rebbe says, including things that should have been mentioned and are not mentioned, and the Eibishter wird sicher das Maschlim sein. This was Erev Rosh Hashanah, 3 weeks before Shmini Atzeres. The final punchline was Yud Gimel Tishrei. Yud Gimel Tishrei, the Rebbe Fabrengt then, and the Rebbe spoke then Siches, that everybody was like puzzled, what Shaychas do these Inyanim have now that the Frierdiker Rebbe lived on miracles, and the Rebbe asked to sing the Gunim of Chag HaSukkos. This whole thing was a puzzle. In the Sichas that the Rebbe spoke, right after the Maimer, was that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter in Tov Reish Pei Tes, Machar As Yom Kippurim, that there should be an inyan of Simcha in Chag HaSukkos through the days of Sukkos, Keilol Shabbos Bereishis, Ashlomas Ha'er Kitev, a ganzen Sukkos. And the Rebbe said, somehow the Rebbe got into the point that the Frierdiker Rebbe, mit gesehen that they were in that besides the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Beis Asurim, and he came out und sie zugekommen Yomte bei jedem Chassidim, and then the Rebbe mentions about the health of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that we know that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the last 17 years, the doctors had no idea how he was existing in a Neshama Beguf. And the Rebbe says, we can fragen die Doktorim, we can ask the doctors, and hear from them how Pasha, it has no explanation, no logical explanation. This is what the Rebbe was saying then. I remember after the Fabringen then, I'm sure it went on with many groups of Bocharim. We were wondering, why is the Rebbe mentioning something which is pertains to 28 years ago, Yud Shvat. Akoponim, the whole inyan was Kol Ha-inyan Eimar Pella, that it was a puzzle. As the days moved on, especially when we got to Shmini Atzeres, Rabbi Mentlik then told Chassidim, now he's putting together the pieces of the puzzle. The Rebbe is speaking about Simcha. That's what the Rebbe wanted. The Rebbe is speaking about the health of the Frierdiker Rebbe. He's pointing to Chassidim what they should expect. And all the inyanim that the Rebbe mentioned, all fell in place. It was then Chalmei Sukkos alone, every tefillah. The Rebbe came in, the Eilam was singing a nigun, and the Rebbe turned around to the Eilam to encourage the nigun. It went on 3 times a day, all the 3 tefillahs. Same thing, Chalamed. The Rebbe put in his whole energy in being made in the nigunim. From this we saw that by the Rebbe, the derech was the union of Simcha, that this is what the Rebbe wanted from Chassidim, and Simcha paid its geder, is b'meila, this is something which will pull him out of it. It was Shminiyat, it was Heishayna Rabbah, and the Rebbetzin asked in the house, what Sefer Torah will the Rebbe be holding by HaKofis? Was it a heavy Sefer Torah, a big Sefer Torah? And they told the Rebbetzin that the Rebbe has his usual small Sefer Torah. And there were more inyanim happening. The Rebbetzin called up also, they should make the HaKofis shorter. They called up mosquitoes. And these were inyanim that she realized that the Rebbe was exhausted, and she wanted to make sure everything would go smoothly. It was the night of Shmini Atzeres, which many of us saw. It was then that the clapping slowed down and the Rebbe sat down. Very quickly the Rebbe sat down, and that's when they brought water, and the Rebbe said it's chutz l'sukkah, it's before Kiddush, and he's not going to drink anything. My father in nature, he treated the Rebbe many times. He was a doctor by the Rebbe in a cycle of 40 years. And there were many phone calls that came through their house by us. And there were many inyanim that happened by the Rebbe that the Rebbe asked that he should come to check him out. Inyanim that people didn't know. For example, as we mentioned a few years ago, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, that there was once a Maisa Chavdalet Kislev time, that the Rebbe had something with the heart. Nobody knew anything. I remember Tavshin Lamed Ches, I went over to my father, I said, I heard a shmu in the street. She says, yeah, sap is given. But 14 years, you didn't know anything. He didn't talk, nobody spoke. Al-Derech said that night, but I heard from people, we all ran out. With the Gehasen, the Meilam game. But there were a few people, they were there b'shas Maisa, so they told me later that my father approached the Rebbe, checked his pulse, He didn't have any instruments with him, but checked his pulse, and he said that the Rebbe is experiencing a heart attack. And he said to bring oxygen. The Rebbe said he does not want oxygen, so he asked the Rebbe if the Rebbe wants to go up to rest for a while. So the Rebbe said he wants to finish Hakofis and then he'll return to his room. I remember that evening, a Bocher went over to me and he said to me, Halavai, tomorrow night, so the Rebbe verbringen as usual. Because at that time, not everybody knew it was the heart. They didn't know the seriousness. There was certainly yonim that there was a lid on the publicity, and therefore not everybody knew. My father heard these words. My father said one word, Halavai. He already knew that it's more serious than that. This is what happened up to that night. The next day, what does the Rebbe have on his mind? Shmini Atzeres, he's asking what's happening with Chassidim in Shul. Was herzich unten. Rabbi Groner told the Rebbe that they're going to be going to Halucha, and that evening. So the Rebbe said, Gib Iber, es soll sein mit noch aggresseren Sturm. That night we came back from Halucha. I remember Abzalman Taibel, others were standing and crying, and Bocharim were talking to them, being me'eded the simcha, and that's when they were dancing all night. First, the liegen was the Rebbe soll gesund sein, and then the liegen the Rebbe is gesund. The doctors were a little concerned because the vibration into the room would disturb the Rebbe. So the Rebbe said it's a sweet music. It was a while later that the Rebbe took his first step. As I get menibed, that the Rebbe said then, this is what Chassidim can ufton, what Chassidim could accomplish. The next day by Simchas Torah, after there was a minyan outside the Rebbe's room, and the Elam, there's a selected minyan with a screen between, and the Rebbe heard everything from inside. I heard from my father that the Rebbe, they gave him the Sefer Torah, a small Sefer Torah, and the Rebbe was sitting, and with the Sefer Torah, he was circling the Sefer Torah on his table, on the table near the bed. He was circling it, doing the Hakofis. After Musaf, Rabbi Kazanovsky went in, he had Yortzeit, and others went in from the minyan. He started to cry. So the Rebbe said, Pchiyas is neged ritzeini. Crying is against my will. The Rebbe gave him mashke, he had Yortzeit Simchas Torah. For those of us that remember, he used to daven for the Yomid, Shachris, Simchas Torah Shachris. In the afternoon, Chassidim got together to make a fabrengen. We prepared the Rebbe's place, challah, everything. The chair, everything was ready, everybody washed, and the fabrengen began. In the middle of the fabrengen, Rabbi Groner came, he has 3 messages from the Rebbe. One message is, he has Keshel Bracha, from the Avdollah that the Rebbe made in the room. A second message is that there was a certain technician who came to draw blood by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him, how is it that the blood is going against its nature? When a person takes blood is yered, usually this liquid goes down. Here, the blood is going up into the tube, into the hand. So he told the Rebbe that there's a vacuum, and that vacuum schleps the blood in. So the Rebbe said that this is a lesson that if a person feels he's a klei reikon, dafke he is machzik, he can take in more. And the Rebbe said that al derech zeh is also l'mayla b'negeh the tzimtzum arishin, that the kavana of the tzimtzum was there should be a gilui after that. The Rebbe told Rabbi Groner to talk over with Rabbi Yael Khan, and we understood from that that the Rebbe was saying that although the chair was standing empty, from deswegen this is a hachona, agdome to what's going to take place after that. This was a chizuk for Chassidim. The third message was, I don't know how many of you remember the way he gave it over. He said that the Rebbe told him a third message, and the Rebbe said, "Das sollst du sie sagen noch zeher havdalah." This you should tell them after their havdalah. We benched, we daven ma'ariv, we made havdalah, We had no idea what the announcement will be. Announcement came, the Rebbe is going to speak now. The Rebbe is going to speak. Nobody expected it. It says, Eine Dema Shmiya L'Riya. So sometimes the union of Shmiya L'Riya, sometimes Riya is more than Shmiya. But Be'etzem, I can say it, but then again, that evening, that the regesh of the dancing that night, even like Poka Igro, Pasha dancing to the roof. Chavra was ready to jump to the roof. It was more yet than what you see on the video. This was the feeling of Chassidim then, knowing the Rebbe is going to speak. 48 hours after the Meura, Be'etzem even less than 48 hours, because the second one happened 5 in the morning. And the Rebbe wants to speak to Chassidim. The doctors gave the Rebbe 5 minutes. And the Rebbe spoke for 22 minutes. When they asked the Rebbe if he said everything he wanted, the Rebbe said, if I should say everything I want, I would need 24 hours. 12 hours. B'chol from the Rebbe said a maimer, a sicha, and when they asked the Rebbe why did he cry, he says that he cried because he was talking to Chassidim and b'negeh to the Geula. That's when the Rebbe's voice choked. It's interesting, the maimer the Rebbe chose to say that night was a maimer b'negeh moshel of a melech, that Bnei HaMelech came to see Lishel B'Shleimer. They came to visit their father, the king. That maimer the Rebbe said a few times over the years, but this was mamish then, Bo Lishel B'Shleimer. It was the Bonis who are married from a distance, and Bonis daughters who are married from close. A ganzer medrash on this inyan. And the Rebbe chose that maimer. And after Yom Tov, the Rebbe asked, after the Farbrengen, the Rebbe asked, when is he getting the mail? They told the Rebbe, the mail will take time. So the Rebbe said, if you're going to push it off, that it should take more time, I'll have more work to do to catch up. So b'meila, it's kedai to give it to me right away. There was a hatzah to one of the professors who brought up that maybe somebody else should open the mail. So the Rebbe says that will not happen. Now, over the months, there was a Dr. Weiss's teacher, his name Dr. Lewin. He came from Boston, and he evaluated the Rebbe different than every few months. And one of the things that he was pressing was that the Rebbe should continue with Mitzvah Shabbos Farbrengens. The Rebbe Bechlal was not comfortable with Mitzvah Shabbos Farbrengens. We don't need much to know it. We see it right in the beginning of the Farbrengen. The Rebbe starts with a snatzlos that the Farbrengen is Mitzvah Siba Sheines, Sibas Mishunes, Siba Shein and Tluyes. Many Farbrengens, the Rebbe started like that. The Rebbe told this doctor that when it comes to Shabbos, he asked the Rebbe, what's the uniqueness of Shabbos? The Rebbe says, when it comes to Shabbos, and I come to Farbreng, I elevate Chassidim, and Chassidim elevate me. And this we all receive exclusively from a Shabbos Farbrengen. The Rebbe says that eventually he was looking forward to continue Farbrengens on Shabbos. The pale 2 years, there were limitations that the Rebbe Farbreng Mitzvah Shabbos. One of the inyanim that we can say b'negeh Mitzvah Shabbos Farbrengens is that those who were never in that generation, or those before Gimel Tammuz, who never saw Shabbos Farbrengen, never heard the Rosh Sikha. But in middle of Iyar, Yud Gimel Iyar, Tavshil Lamed Ches, the Rebbe asked they should bring the Chumash, and he started to give Rosh Sikhas. So for a year and a half, we have audios from Farbrengens with Rosh Sikhas, which is a whole different style, the voice, the ganze Riesling, the Rebbe looked at everything positive. When doctors told the Rebbe that if he's that he has to be careful because there's a 25% chance that Chas v'Sholem it could recur. So the Rebbe said there's a 75% chance that it won't happen. Al derech zeh, when the Rebbe would take walks with the doctor in the hallway when they closed upstairs the shul, and he would walk. So there were times that the Rebbe started to climb a few stairs. The Rebbe wanted a bissel akitzelt on them, doctor. So the Rebbe said, am I ready to climb Mount Everest? Another time the Rebbe said, am I ready to dance? It's like, and he says, Rebbe, not yet, not yet. He already thought the Rebbe wants it right there and then. When the Rebbe saw in the Allgemeine Journal that there are barricades in front of 770, the reason was that because every opening of the door upstairs would be vibrating into the Rebbe's room, would disturb the Rebbe's rest. So the Rebbe, when he saw that, the Rebbe said that they should remove it. And the Rebbe said, if they won't remove it, the Rebbe says, I will go out and remove it myself. At a certain point, when the Rebbe saw the machines in Gan Eden attachten, the Rebbe said, what darf man sie haben? Schick sie weg. I think it was then that the Rebbe sent, at a certain point, the Rebbe asked that they should send for the Kleisenberger Rebbe, who had a heart condition, and the Rebbe said that we can help them, with the machines to give it over to them. Before the Rebbe went home, tonight, Thursday night, was Rosh Chodesh Kislev, Ki b'pa'ama rishena. Thursday night, Aleph Kislev was Friday. When the Rebbe went home, it's interesting, the Rebbe asked, when are the Bacharim not outside? The Rebbe wanted to be very quiet. The Pel Mamish, the Rebbe was told that after 7 o'clock, it's after Seder, they go to eat. But from Bacharim, you can't hide. So Bacharim found out the Rebbe is going home. A big Elam gathered. And I remember mit sich gedungen damals, what liegen to sing, Napoleon's March, Akofes liegen. Akoponim, the Rebbe came out, mit ongem singen. The Rebbetzin was on the second floor. She was watching from the second floor. And she said then, Ich hab nicht gesehen, als Simcha sind Yud Beis Tammuz Tafresh Pei Zayin. I did not see such a joy since my father was released from prison 50 years earlier. A joy from Chassidim. Before the Rebbe went home, the Rebbe told the doctors, the name of my street, Zog the Rebbe, is not Patient Street, but President Street. And b'meila, he didn't want any doctors in the house. Chal, the Rebbe was very private when it came to health in Yonim. It was once the Rebbe said a lashon that b'chlal everything by him is private, especially when it comes to health. My father once told me when he visited the Rebbe in the house, talking about in the Mems or in the Lameds, before the Lamed Ches, and not in that area. And when he was coming back, and the Rebbe was also going to 770, the Rebbe said, "Ihr sollt nicht kommen mit mir zusammen. You shouldn't come together with me. They should not know that you're coming from me. Wir sollen nicht wissen, ihr kommt von mir." That's how much the Rebbe did not want Bechlal anybody to know anything about it. Erev Pesach, the Rebbe called in the doctors who were involved, and the Rebbe gave each one an envelope. This was when the Rebbe already gave matzah to kvutzes. And he gave everyone an envelope, which was money, and I think could be michtav kloli also, and the matzah. My father would get every year a matzah. The Rebbe would tell him it's a meichel of emunah, meichel of refuah. One of the doctors was Dr. Richter, a cousin with Kunin, Shleima Kunin. So he asked the Rebbe, he saw he's getting paid, does this mean we are losing the schus of treating the Rebbe? This I heard from my father. So the Rebbe said, no, Asya de Mogen Shavya. A doctor who doesn't take any money is not worth anything. So b'meile, he has to get paid. And in addition to that, the schus remains. This was in Lamed Ches. It was then that the Rebbe started to go home, Rosh Chodesh Nissen. Many things started to happen around Pesach time then. From Tafshin Lamed Ches and on, the Rebbe started a new tkufa. We see it in the Siches, in Kamos, in quantity. The volumes of every year Siches, Maimorim. And interestingly, that right after Lamed Ches, the Rebbe started to speak in Maimorim, being Madgish, Yerides HaNeshama Beguf, being Madgish, the union of Ishapcha Chasheicha L'Nheira, being Madgish, the Aveda of Mitzvahs Dafka Lamata, Aveda Tshuva Birurim it was al derech b'negei da'ayeka of the Alter Rebbe that it brought him back in the shuv, so the Rebbe settling back. In Yonim HaKlolim, as we know, Tzivis Hashem, Tzivateira HaKlolim, Limud HaRambam, dollars, v'chula v'chula. Names of years. The Rebbe started to name years connected with the Gula, beginning from Tavshim and Beis. Wrote it in his Shalshelas HaYachas, in his biography in the beginning of the Ayem Yem. Puk, Chazum Mada'ama Debar, what the world says, Tehei Shnaz Bias Mashiach. From then on, he continued the whole time. The point that we can take out from that is how the Rebbe catered to every Chassidim, and although he was in this matzav, he wanted to know what's going on with Chassidim. He wanted to hear the matzav of Chassidim, what they're doing, and send a message to Chassidim that this is only a temporary inyan and everything will resume. This shows the ava of the Rebbe to Chassidim. And Memela also, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, Kamayim Aponim Leponim, needs to be the ava of Chassidim to the Rebbe. The ava of Chassidim to the Rebbe is basically expressed in his kashrus, as the Rebbe writes in the Ayem Yem, Limud HaTeira, Limud HaMaimorim, Kriyas HaSiches, Shmiras HaTakones. There the Friedrich Rebbe mentioned Tilim, his statfus with Anash B'Isvadusam, Hinebezei Aiskashlus. By the Rebbe, this is the inyan of learning his Torah. So the Rebbe should help him that he should bring about more achlatas tevis, a chizuk and his kashas connecting with the Rebbe. The way that the Rebbe once mentioned, I'll conclude with an interesting comment that somebody mentioned to the Rebbe, why is it that we see there's such a love from Chassidim to the Rebbe? So the Rebbe said, I guess that it's a love that goes both ways. And b'meila, it's two ways, from Chassidim to the Rebbe, from the Rebbe to Chassidim. So b'meila, this is a time to chapsach and to reconnect with the Rebbe on a daily basis. Agut Yom Tov.